The prisoners kneel in rows on the beach at Lampsacus. 3,000 Athenian citizens, rowers, marines, officers, stripped of armor, hands bound, heads bowed. Behind them, the hulks of captured triremes smolder in the twilight. The smell of burning pitch and seawater mingles with blood. Lysander stands before them. He is not tall. He is not particularly impressive to look at, but his eyes hold the cold certainty of a man who has calculated exactly what this moment requires. The Athenians had done something unforgivable. At the Battle of Aegospotami, just 1 year earlier, they had captured the crews of a defeated Spartan fleet and executed them, not as soldiers, as criminals. Now Lysander asks a simple question: what should be done with men who have committed atrocities? The Spartan assembly already knows the answer. They knew it before the question was asked. The executions take most of the night. When dawn breaks over the Hellespont, 3,000 Athenian bodies float in the shallows. And Athens, mighty Athens, the school of Hellas, the empire that had dominated the Aegean for half a century, has exactly one fleet commander left alive. One man, one ship, and a message he must carry home. The message is simple. The war is over. You have lost everything, so how did this happen? How did the greatest naval empire the ancient world has ever known will cease to exist? The Peloponnesian War did not begin with a battle. It began with fear. In 431 BCE, the Greek world was divided between two great power blocks. Athens led the Delian League, originally formed to defend against Persian aggression, now transformed into an Athenian empire, extracting tribute from over 200 subject states. Sparta led the Peloponnesian League, a looser confederation of land-based powers who viewed Athenian expansion with mounting alarm. For decades, the two blocs had maintained an uneasy peace, but that peace was built on mutual deterrence, and deterrence requires belief that war would be too costly to contemplate. By 431 BCE, neither side believed that anymore. The spark came from Corcyra and Potidaea, minor disputes that escalated through a chain of alliances and counter-alliances until full-scale war became inevitable. But the underlying cause was simpler. Athens was growing too powerful, and Sparta could not accept a world where Athenian hegemony went unchallenged. The Athenian statesman Pericles had a strategy for victory. Athens would avoid major land battles where Spartan hoplites held the advantage. Instead, the city would retreat behind its long walls, fortifications connecting Athens to its port at Piraeus, and use its unmatched navy to raid Spartan territory, protect Athenian trade, and maintain the tribute flowing from subject states. Time, Pericles believed, would exhaust Sparta's willingness to fight. The strategy might have worked, but in 430 BCE, plague struck Athens. The disease, possibly typhoid fever, possibly something else entirely, swept through the overcrowded city with apocalyptic fury. Perhaps 1/4 of the Athenian population died, including Pericles himself. The plague did not merely kill bodies. It killed the cautious, defensive strategy that might have preserved Athenian power. In the decades that followed, Athens lurched between aggression and exhaustion. The city launched the Sicilian expedition in 415 BCE, an attempt to conquer Syracuse and dominate the western Mediterranean. The expedition ended in 413 BCE, with the total destruction of the Athenian invasion force. 40,000 men dead or enslaved, 200 ships lost, the treasury emptied. Any rational power would have sued for peace after such a catastrophe. Athens was not rational. Athens was democratic, and democracies at war do not easily admit defeat. The city rebuilt its fleet with astonishing speed, melting down gold and silver from temple treasuries to finance new construction. Athenian shipyards launched fresh triremes. Athenian recruiting officers scoured the Aegean for oarsmen. By 406 BCE, Athens had somehow assembled another massive fleet, but the human cost could not be replaced. The experienced officers who had died in Sicily were gone. The veterans who knew how to fight and win at sea were gone. The institutional memory of a century of naval dominance was gone. What remained was desperation, and desperate men make desperate mistakes. In 406 BCE, the Athenian fleet won its last great victory. At Arginuse, near the island of Lesbos, 155 Athenian triremes faced 120 Spartan vessels under the command of Callicratidas. The battle was fierce, chaotic, fought in rough seas with visibility obscured by spray and smoke. When it ended, the Spartans had lost over 70 ships. Callicratidas himself was dead. It was an overwhelming Athenian triumph, except for what happened next. During the battle, approximately 25 Athenian ships had been disabled or sunk. Thousands of Athenian sailors clung to wreckage, waiting for rescue. The victorious commanders ordered a squadron to retrieve the survivors, while the main fleet pursued the fleeing Spartans. Then a storm blew in. The rescue squadron never launched. The pursuit was abandoned, and by morning the men in the water were dead, drowned, frozen, or simply exhausted beyond the point where they could keep holding on. When news reached Athens, the democracy's rage was incandescent. The assembly put 6 of the 8 commanding generals on trial, collectively without individual hearings, in violation of Athenian law. The philosopher Socrates, serving his single day as a presiding officer, refused to put the illegal motion to a vote. The assembly overruled him. 6 generals were executed for failing to rescue their own men. The message was clear. Athens would tolerate no failure, accept no excuse, forgive no mistake. Commanders who lost battles would die. Commanders who won battles but lost men would also die, and the men who would have to command the fleet at Aegospotami absorbed this lesson with cold clarity. They understood that returning to Athens after a defeat meant execution. They also understood that doing anything that might look like cowardice, retreating to Sestos, for instance, rather than confronting the enemy directly, would be reported back to the assembly by their political enemies. Better to risk disaster than to face certain death at home. This is how democracies lose wars, not through lack of courage, but through the transformation of courage into something indistinguishable from suicide. If you appreciate stories like this, the kind that go beyond surface-level history to explore the human decisions that shaped our world, consider subscribing to Not Nostalgic History. We tell stories about the past that help us understand the present. Late August, 405 BCE. The Athenian fleet enters the Hellespont. 168 triremes, approximately 30,000 men. 6 generals sharing command. Because Athenian democracy trusts no single leader with so much power, their mission: protect the grain ships traveling from the Black Sea to Athens. Without that grain, Athens starves. With it, the city can continue fighting indefinitely. The fleet makes its base at Aegospotami, Goat Rivers in Greek, a beach on the European shore of the strait. The choice seems logical. Aegospotami lies directly across the Hellespont from Lampsacus, where Lysander has anchored his Spartan fleet. By camping here, the Athenians can monitor enemy movements and challenge any attempt to move up or down the strait. What the generals do not consider, or choose to ignore, is what happens if Lysander does not want to move. At dawn, the Athenian fleet launches and rows across the strait in full battle formation. 168 triremes, oars flashing in the morning light, bronze rams cutting the water. They take up position before Lampsacus and wait for the Spartans to emerge. Lysander does not emerge. His 180 ships remain in the harbor, crews at ready, but oars shipped. The Spartans simply wait. The Athenians hold formation for hours. The sun climbs. Men grow thirsty. Arm muscles burn from the tension of holding position against current and wind. By midday, the generals order a withdrawal. The fleet rows back to Aegospotami. There is no harbor there, just an open beach. The triremes are hauled onto the sand, props wedged beneath their hulls to keep them upright. Crews disperse to find food and fresh water. Lysander sends out scout ships to observe. They note the timing of the Athenian withdrawal. They note the dispersal of the crews. They note how far inland the sailors wander and how long they stay away. Then they report back. Dawn. The Athenian fleet launches again. Once more, they cross the strait. Once more, they take up battle positions before Lampsacus. Once more, Lysander refuses to fight. This time, the Athenians grow frustrated. Some captains urge an attack on the harbor itself, force the Spartans to defend or die. The generals overrule them. Attacking a defended harbor with triremes is suicide. Ramming requires open water and momentum. By early afternoon, the fleet withdraws again. On the beach at Aegospotami, the pattern repeats. Ships beached, crews dispersed. Food acquired from villages increasingly resentful of the foreign soldiers, stripping their countryside bare. Lysander's scouts note that the Athenians are growing careless. The afternoon dispersal is longer now. Men wander farther from the beach. Discipline frays. The third dawn brings the third challenge, the third refusal, the third withdrawal. But this day, something different happens. Alcibiades rides down from his fortress. He finds the generals in conference on the beach, arguing about supplies, discipline, and the inexplicable Spartan reluctance to fight. Alcibiades interrupts. He tells them that their position is suicidal. Aegospotami has no walls, no market, no defensive features of any kind. Every afternoon, their fleet becomes a collection of beached hulls, guarded by men scattered across miles of countryside. He tells them that Sestos, 18 miles southwest along the coast, has everything they lack. Fortifications, fresh water, a real harbor where ships can anchor rather than beach. Markets where crews can buy food without leaving their vessels. He tells them that Lysander is not avoiding battle because he fears defeat. He is waiting for the perfect moment, the moment when Athenian carelessness creates an opportunity too valuable to resist. The generals listen. Some of them recognize the truth in his words, but they cannot agree on action. Philocles openly despises Alcibiades as a traitor who has served Sparta and Persia against his own people. Antimantus suspects Alcibiades of scheming to regain command, and, with it, the chance to return triumphant to Athens. Others simply resent an exile, telling them how to conduct their campaign. The generals inform Alcibiades that they command the fleet, not him. They suggest he return to his fortress. Alcibiades rides away. He does not return. The fourth dawn, the fourth crossing, the fourth formation before Lampsacus. Lysander does not emerge. This time, the Athenian generals do not wait as long. They are tired. Their men are hungry. Supplies are running low. They withdraw to Aegospotami before midday. The beach becomes chaos. Men stream inland, desperate for food. The nearest villages have been stripped bare. Sailors must march miles to find provisions. Officers abandon their vessels to supervise foraging parties. The triremes sit on the sand, unguarded, their oar banks empty. This is the moment Lysander has been waiting for. Late afternoon, day 4. Across the Hellespont, Lysander's fleet lies in perfect readiness. Crews have been fed and rested. Oars are manned. Rams have been polished. Every ship knows its position in the formation. The Spartan Navarch stands on the deck of his flagship, watching the scout ships return with their final reports. The Athenian fleet is defenseless. Most crews are scattered. Perhaps 20% of the sailors remain within running distance of their vessels. Lysander raises a bronze shield. It catches the afternoon sun and blazes like a signal fire. 180 triremes surge out of Lampsacus. 7 miles of water separates the two fleets. At cruising speed, a trireme covers roughly 5 miles per hour. At ramming speed, all rowers at maximum effort, perhaps 8 miles per hour. Lysander orders ramming speed. His rowers are fresh and well-fed, their muscles primed by 4 days of inaction. The oars strike the water in unison, 170 men per ship pulling in synchronized rhythm. The sound is extraordinary, a continuous rolling thunder that echoes off the hills on both shores. The Spartan fleet travels in a crescent formation, the horns sweeping wide to encircle the Athenian position. Each captain knows his assigned target. There will be no confusion, no hesitation, no wasted motion. On the beach at Aegospotami, the first Athenian lookouts spot the approaching fleet when it is perhaps 3 miles out. At ramming speed, they have less than 25 minutes before impact. 25 minutes to recall 30,000 scattered men. 25 minutes to man 168 triremes. 25 minutes to launch, form ranks, and prepare to fight. It cannot be done. Everyone knows it cannot be done. They try anyway. The warning spreads in waves of screaming panic. Men sprint toward the shore from villages miles inland, throwing away their provisions, abandoning their purchases, trampling each other in the rush. Trumpet calls echo across the countryside, assembly signals that dissolve into chaotic noise. On the beach, officers desperately try to organize launches. Each trireme weighs approximately 40 tons. Launching requires crews to remove the props, drag the hull down to the water's edge, and float it before men can board and man the oars. Some ships make it into the water with partial crews, 30 men, 50 men, 80 men struggling to do the work designed for 170. They row in ragged, uncoordinated strokes, the vessels wallowing sluggishly. Other ships never launch at all. Their crews are too distant, too late. Too few. The triremes sit on the sand as the Spartan fleet closes, defenseless as beached whales awaiting slaughter. The Spartan crescent strikes the Athenian position like a bronze fist. Triremes at ramming speed develop tremendous kinetic energy, 40 tons of wood and metal moving at 8 miles per hour, focused onto a bronze ram weighing perhaps 200 pounds. When a ram strikes another ship's hull, the impact tears through, planking and ribs like a blade through flesh. The half-manned Athenian vessels that manage to launch are the first to die. One by one, they are rammed amidships, their hulls split open, seawater flooding through gaps that cannot be plugged. Men spill into the Hellespont. Rowers still chained to their benches in some cases. Marines struggling to swim in armor that drags them down like anchors. The smell is overwhelming. Salt water, blood, the pitch and tar used to waterproof hulls. Human waste from terrified sailors losing control of their bowels. Smoke rising from vessels that catch fire when bronze rams strike sparks from iron fittings. On the beach, Spartan marines leap from their ships before they ground, wading through waist-deep water with spears and swords drawn. The Athenians who remained ashore, skeleton crews, wounded men, those too slow to flee, meet them with whatever weapons they can find. It is not a battle, it is butchery. In the chaos, one Athenian commander keeps his head. Conon has managed to launch 9 ships with sufficient crews to actually fight. He has organized them into a small formation, oars manned, rams oriented toward the enemy. For a few desperate minutes, he considers charging into the Spartan fleet, attempting to buy time for other vessels to escape. Then he looks at the beach and understands that there is nothing left to save. The Athenian fleet is destroyed. Ships burn or sink or lie capsized in the shallows. Thousands of men are dead or dying or fleeing inland. The handful of triremes that might still launch will be overwhelmed before they clear the surf. Conon orders his 9 ships to break south. They run with the current, oars flashing, every man pulling for his life. A squadron of Spartan vessels gives chase, but Conon's lead is too great. One by one, the pursuers fall back. Conon escapes with 9 ships out of 168. He does not return to Athens. He cannot return to Athens, not with news of this magnitude. The assembly that executed victorious generals for failing to rescue drowning sailors will certainly execute the commander who lost an entire fleet. Instead, Conon sails for Cyprus, where he will eventually enter the service of the Persian king. He will survive the fall of Athens and, years later, rebuild Athenian naval power with Persian gold. But that is a story for another time. Today, he is simply a man running from a catastrophe too immense to comprehend. By nightfall, it is over. 160 triremes have been captured or destroyed. Only Conon's 9 escapees remain afloat. Perhaps 3,000 Athenian sailors have been killed in the water or on the beach. Another 3,000, possibly more, have been captured. Among the dead is the general Philocles, the man who most forcefully rejected Alcibiades' warnings. Some accounts say he died fighting on the beach. Others say he was captured and executed afterward. The Spartans spend the night securing their prizes and rounding up prisoners. The captured Athenians are bound and marched to Lampsacus, where they are held in makeshift pens. They do not know what will happen to them. They have reason to fear the worst. The morning after the battle, Lysander convenes his allies to decide the prisoners' fate. The council includes representatives from every Greek city that Sparta has liberated from Athenian control, or that Athens has wronged during 27 years of war. The list of grievances is long. Athens has executed prisoners. Athens has enslaved populations. Athens has razed cities and sold their inhabitants into bondage. Athens has imposed crushing tribute on subject states and brutally suppressed any attempt at resistance. And then there is the matter of Philocles. Before Aegospotami, the Athenian general had captured 2 triremes, 1 Spartan, 1 from the city of Andros. According to tradition, Philocles had the prisoners from both ships thrown overboard to drown. Other accounts say he ordered their right hands cut off, crippling them permanently. Now Philocles himself is a prisoner, and the council is in no mood for mercy. Lysander addresses the assembly. The decision, he says, rests with them, but he reminds them of Athenian atrocities, the executions, the mutilations, the decree passed after the Battle of Aegospotami, threatening to cut off the hands of any captured Spartan sailors. The vote is unanimous. 3,000 Athenian prisoners will be executed. The executions begin that evening and continue through the night. Ancient sources do not describe the method in detail, but mass executions in the Greek world typically involved throat-cutting, faster and more efficient than other means, requiring only a blade and a steady hand. The prisoners are brought forward in groups. They are forced to kneel. The executioners work systematically, moving down the lines. We do not know if any prisoners begged for mercy. We do not know if any attempted escape. We know only that when dawn broke over the Hellespont, approximately 3,000 Athenian citizens lay dead on the shores of Lampsacus. Their bodies were left for the sea to claim. Among the Athenian commanders, only one is spared, Adimantus. Some sources suggest that Adimantus had been secretly negotiating with Lysander before the battle, possibly even arranging the Athenian defeat in exchange for his own survival. This accusation was made by his political enemies in Athens, and its truth cannot be verified. What is certain is that Adimantus was not executed with the others. He was released and allowed to return to Athens. Perhaps Lysander wanted a witness, someone to carry news of the disaster home, to describe the scale of Athenian losses and the totality of Spartan victory. Psychological warfare requires messengers, or perhaps Adimantus really was a traitor. We will never know. The Perilous was no ordinary ship. Among the Athenian fleet, 2 triremes held sacred status, the Perilous and the Abu Salaminia. They carried ambassadors to foreign powers. They delivered messages of war and peace. They transported priests to sacred festivals. When the democracy needed to speak with the authority of the state itself, these ships carried its voice. The Paralus was crewed by citizens of exceptional loyalty, men selected for their dedication to democracy, their reliability in crisis, their willingness to deliver whatever news the city needed to hear, however terrible that news might be. On this September night in 405 BCE, the news is the worst in Athenian history. The Paralus had escaped the slaughter at Aegospotami through luck and position. Stationed at the edge of the Athenian formation, its crew had seen the Spartan fleet emerge before the main attack struck. They had launched immediately, not to fight, but to flee. Their mission was survival. Their duty was bearing witness. For 3 days, the ship has raced across the Aegean. The crew has barely slept. They have eaten whatever dried provisions remained in the hold. They have pulled their oars until their hands bled, driven by a single imperative. Athens must know. Now, as darkness falls over Piraeus, the sacred messenger ship slides between the harbor walls. The crew does not wait for the vessel to dock. They do not secure lines or lower the gangplank. They do not report to the harbor master or present their credentials to the authorities. They begin to wail. In ancient Greece, grief has a sound. It is not weeping, that quiet, private expression of sorrow that modern cultures associate with mourning. It is olaluge, a high, piercing cry that announces catastrophe to everyone within earshot. It is women keening over the bodies of the dead. It is survivors screaming the news of disaster. It is the voice of a civilization confronting its own destruction. The crew of the Paralus unleashes this sound into the harbor night. 170 voices, hoarse from days of exertion, cracked from thirst and exhaustion, rise together in the traditional lamentation. The sound echoes off the stone quays of Piraeus. It bounces between the warehouses and ship sheds that line the waterfront. It carries across the still water of the harbor basin. Dock workers stop unloading cargo. Prostitutes emerge from waterfront taverns. Fishermen preparing for the morning catch freeze at their nets. Everyone knows what that sound means. Something terrible has happened. Something beyond ordinary misfortune, beyond a lost battle or a sunken ship or a fallen commander. This is the sound of total calamity, the sound of the world ending. The wailing spreads. A woman on the docks takes up the cry. She does not yet know why, only that the ancient response to disaster demands participation. A merchant joins her, then a sailor, then a cluster of slaves who have been loading amphorae onto a Corinthian vessel. The sound travels up from the harbor toward the long walls. The long walls stretch 4 miles from Piraeus to Athens proper, parallel fortifications enclosing a corridor wide enough for roads, for markets, for the constant traffic between city and port. On this night, the walls serve as a conduit for something else. Sound carries strangely between stone surfaces. The wailing that began in the harbor does not simply fade with distance. It bounces, amplifies, transforms into something that seems to come from everywhere at once. Soldiers patrolling the walls hear it first. They stop, straining to understand. Then they recognize the sound and add their voices to the cry. Citizens living in the corridor between the walls hear it next. Families eating their evening meals. Craftsmen finishing the day's work. Children already asleep, jerked awake by a sound they have never heard but instinctively understand. The wailing passes through the sacred gate and enters Athens. It is perhaps 2 hours after sunset. The agora is empty. Markets closed, merchants return to their homes. The great open space that serves as the heart of Athenian democracy, dark and silent. Not silent for long. The first cries reach the neighborhoods bordering the agora. Heads emerge from windows. Doors bang open. Figures appear in the streets, asking questions that no one can answer. What has happened? What does it mean? Why are they wailing? No one knows yet. But the sound continues to spread. Voice joining voice. Street calling to street, the wave of lamentation rolling through Athens like a tide that cannot be stopped. By midnight, the entire city is awake. The wailing has become a continuous roar, tens of thousands of voices raised in grief for a catastrophe they feel in their bones but cannot yet name. When the sun rises over Athens, the crying has not stopped. But now the cries have words. The crew of the Paralus has made its report. The news has spread from the harbor to the city to the farthest suburbs. Every Athenian citizen, every metic, every slave, every visitor now knows what the wailing meant. The fleet is destroyed, 160 ships captured or sunk, 3,000 prisoners executed, the generals dead or fled. Conon escaped with 9 triremes. Everyone else is gone. Lysander controls the Hellespont. The grain ships will not come. In the agora, citizens gather in numb clusters. They speak in whispers, as if afraid that loud voices might somehow make the disaster more real. Some still weep. Others have passed beyond tears into a hollow-eyed silence that is somehow worse. The assembly convenes, but there is nothing to debate. What strategy remains when the fleet is gone? What options exist when the enemy controls the sea lanes that bring food to the city? An old man sits on the steps of the Stoa of Zeus, staring at nothing. He served in the fleet that defeated the Persians at Salamis, 60 years ago, when Athens was young and invincible, and the future stretched limitless before it. He has watched his city rise from fishing village to empire. Now he will watch it fall. A young mother holds her infant, rocking silently, wondering what world this child will inherit. She married a sailor 3 months ago. He was assigned to a trireme called the Nike, Victory. She does not know if he is among the dead or the captured or the few who escaped. She will never know. The records that might have told her were burned with the ships. A philosopher named Socrates walks through the agora, observing the grief with characteristic detachment. He has warned for years that Athens was destroying itself, that the democracy had become a tyranny of the mob, that the pursuit of empire had corrupted the city's soul. Now his warnings have been vindicated. He takes no pleasure in being right. Lysander does not sail immediately for Athens. A lesser commander might rush to deliver the killing blow, might race to Piraeus while the enemy reeled, hoping to capture the city before it could prepare for siege. This would be a mistake. Athens behind its walls remains formidable. The long walls cannot be stormed by naval forces. The city can endure siege for months if it has adequate supplies. The key word is if. Lysander understands that Athens lives on imported grain. The rocky soil of Attica cannot feed the city's population, perhaps 300,000 people, including slaves and metics. Every month, dozens of grain ships must arrive from the Black Sea, from Egypt, from Sicily, carrying the wheat and barley that keep Athenians alive. Control the sea lanes, capture the grain ships, and Athens will starve itself into submission. But there is another consideration. The Delian League may be collapsing, but hundreds of Athenians still live throughout the Aegean. Merchants, colonists, garrison troops, administrators of the empire that is dying. If Lysander sails directly to Athens, these Athenians will remain scattered across a dozen islands and coastal cities. They might organize resistance. They might evacuate to Athens before the siege tightens. They might also eat Athenian food. Lysander conceives a strategy of deliberate cruelty disguised as mercy. He will systematically reduce every Athenian-controlled city in the Aegean. He will expel every Athenian he finds, and he will send them all home, to a city that cannot feed them. The first target is Byzantium. This city commands the Bosporus, the narrow strait connecting the Black Sea to the Sea of Marmara, and ultimately to the Aegean. Every grain ship from the rich farmlands of Ukraine must pass through the Bosporus. Whoever controls Byzantium controls the Athenian food supply. Athens had captured Byzantium in 408 BCE, installing a garrison and a friendly government. The city has remained loyal, or at least obedient, through the final years of the war. Now Lysander's fleet appears in the strait. The garrison commander faces an impossible choice. He has perhaps 2,000 soldiers, enough to hold the walls against anything except a determined siege. But a siege requires relief, and no relief is coming. The Athenian fleet no longer exists. Help from Athens is impossible. He surrenders on terms. Lysander is generous, or appears to be. The garrison troops are allowed to depart unharmed. They may take their personal property. They may sail for Athens on whatever ships can be found. But they may not remain in Byzantium. They may not settle elsewhere in the Aegean. They must go home. The same terms are offered to Athenian merchants, to Athenian colonists, to anyone holding Athenian citizenship. Leave. Go home. Eat Athenian bread. Within a week, several hundred Athenians are sailing toward a city already beginning to starve. The pattern repeats across the Aegean. At Chalcedon, on the Asian side of the Bosporus, the Athenian garrison resists for 3 weeks before capitulating. Lysander permits them to leave with their lives. He installs a pro-Spartan government, a narrow oligarchy of 10 men loyal to him personally. At Cyzicus, site of one of Athens' greatest naval victories, the population welcomes Lysander as a liberator. The Athenians who live there, merchants who have grown wealthy on Aegean trade, are expelled with polite firmness. They may take movable property. They may not take slaves. They must leave immediately. At Lampsacus, where the executions took place, Lysander establishes his headquarters. The city becomes a base for operations throughout the region, a depot for captured grain ships, a prison for important hostages, a symbol of the new order emerging across the Greek world. At Sestos, the fortified harbor that the Athenian generals had refused to occupy, Lysander's forces encounter unexpected resistance. The Athenian garrison here knows what happened to the prisoners at Lampsacus. They know that surrender might mean execution. They hold out for months. Eventually, hunger accomplishes what assault could not. The garrison capitulates in late autumn, too weak to continue fighting. Lysander, who needs the harbor functional, offers relatively lenient terms. The soldiers are expelled, not executed. They join the stream of refugees flowing toward Athens. By November of 405 BCE, Athens is drowning in its own people. They arrive daily, by ship, by foot, by any conveyance that can carry exhausted bodies across the Aegean world. Merchants who lost everything when Lysander's fleet appeared in their harbor. Colonists expelled from settlements their families had occupied for generations. Soldiers discharged from garrisons that no longer exist. Some bring wealth, gold and silver sewn into their garments, jewelry hidden in secret compartments, whatever portable assets could be smuggled past Spartan inspections. Most bring nothing except their lives. The city cannot accommodate them. Athenian housing was never abundant. The population swelled behind the long walls during the plague years and never fully contracted afterward. Now, tens of thousands of additional refugees compete for limited space in a city that cannot feed its existing population. Tent camps sprout along the long walls. Families sleep in temple porticos, in theater seats, in any covered space that offers protection from the autumn rains. The Agora, once the commercial heart of the city, becomes a refugee camp. Citizens of the greatest empire in Greek history, huddled on paving stones, begging for bread. The food situation is catastrophic. Grain reserves that might have sustained the city for months are consumed in weeks. Prices explode. A medimnos of wheat that cost 3 drachmas before the disaster now costs 30, then 50. Then prices become meaningless because no one will sell at any price. People begin hoarding. Rumors of hidden stockpiles trigger riots. The assembly attempts to organize rationing. It fails. The democracy that governed an empire cannot manage the distribution of bread. Political factions accuse each other of corruption. Officials who allocate food become targets of assassination. Starvation, when it begins, starts at the margins. The poor die first. They always do. They have no savings to buy hoarded grain at inflated prices. They have no connections to officials who might divert a portion of the ration. They have no slaves to send foraging in the countryside. Not that there is anything left to forage. An old woman in the Ceramicus district is found dead in her home, 3 days after she stopped appearing at the public fountain. Her neighbors thought she was ill. She was dying. Her body shows the distinctive signs of starvation, skin drawn tight over prominent bones, eyes sunken into the skull, a look of bewildered peace that sometimes attends death by hunger. She is the first. She will not be the last. Within weeks, bodies appear throughout the city. Temple priests, overwhelmed by requests for burial rites, begin conducting mass ceremonies, a single prayer for dozens of corpses, a single offering for hundreds of souls. The cremation pyres burn day and night, filling the Athenian sky with the smell of death. Children die at alarming rates. Their small bodies cannot sustain prolonged hunger. Mothers watch helplessly as their infants weaken, stop crying, stop moving, stop breathing. The sound that fills Athens is no longer the wailing of grief. It is the silence of exhaustion, of people too weak to mourn. The wealthy fare better. They have grain stockpiles and armed slaves to protect them. They have connections outside the city, relatives in allied states, business partners who might smuggle food past the Spartan blockade. They survive, but even the wealthy know that survival is temporary. The siege has not yet truly begun. Lysander's fleet has not yet arrived at Piraeus. The Spartan army has not yet encircled the landward walls. When that happens, Athens will die. The Spartan fleet enters the Saronic Gulf in November of 405 BCE, 180 triremes. The same fleet that destroyed Athens at Aegospotami now takes up position before Piraeus. They anchor in a crescent formation, blocking the harbor mouth, cutting off any hope of supply by sea. Lysander does not attack the port defenses. He does not need to. Time is his weapon. Every day that passes, Athens grows weaker. Every day that passes, more Athenians die. He waits. Simultaneously, the armies of the Peloponnesian League converge on Attica. King Pausanias of Sparta leads the main force, 30,000 hoplites from Sparta and its allied cities. They cross the Isthmus of Corinth and march through the Megarid, past the border fortresses that once protected Athenian territory. There is no resistance. The Athenians have no field army remaining. The hoplites who might have defended the borders are dead. In Sicily, at Aegospotami, in the countless smaller engagements that have bled the city for 27 years. The cavalry that might have harassed the Spartan advance no longer has horses. They were eaten during the first weeks of the food crisis. The Spartans march unimpeded to the walls of Athens. By December, the encirclement is complete. The long walls are now a prison rather than a protection. Spartan outposts line the road from Athens to Piraeus. Any attempt to move between city and port draws arrow fire. The corridor that once guaranteed Athenian survival has become a killing ground. The landward approaches are equally blocked. Spartan pickets patrol every road, every path, every goat track that leads out of Attica. Nothing enters, nothing leaves. Athens is alone. Inside the walls, the dying accelerates. Starvation is no longer a threat. It is a daily reality. The grain stores that once seemed substantial are exhausted. The emergency reserves, temple offerings, seed grain meant for next year's planting, animal feed, have been consumed. People eat what they can find. Rats become valuable. Mice become acceptable. Insects, roasted over small fires, ground into paste, become common. Leather sandals are boiled for their residual nutrition. Anything organic is considered food. The wealthy slaughter their horses, their dogs, their exotic pets. The Athenian aristocrats' menagerie, peacocks, monkeys, even a lion imported from Africa, provides meat for his household. When the animals are gone, he begins eyeing his slaves with calculation. Cannibalism is rumored but not confirmed. People speak of bodies missing from the cremation queues, of neighborhood cook fires with unfamiliar smells. The assembly debates whether to investigate. It decides that some truths are too terrible to confirm. January of 404. BCE is brutally cold. Fuel has become as scarce as food. The trees within the walls were cut months ago. The furniture has been burned. The structural timbers of abandoned buildings have been stripped and consumed. Families huddle together for warmth. They crowd into single rooms, pressing bodies against bodies, sharing what heat their failing metabolisms can generate. Some survive. Many do not. The cold kills differently than hunger. It takes the very young and the very old first. It claims the sick, the wounded, the already weakened. It kills in sleep. People close their eyes and never open them again. By February, the death toll is catastrophic. No one keeps accurate records anymore. The bureaucracy that once documented every birth and death has collapsed along with everything else. But observers estimate that thousands have died since the siege began. Perhaps 10,000. Perhaps more. The living lack the strength to bury the dead properly. Bodies are dragged to central collection points and left for work crews that no longer function. The cremation pyres have gone cold. There is no fuel to burn them. Mass graves are dug outside the Dippolon gate, in the no-man's land between the walls and the Spartan pickets. Work parties venture out under flags of truce, carrying bodies in carts and on stretchers, interring them in trenches that will never be marked. The Spartans allow this. They have no desire to see plague break out. Disease does not respect siege lines, and an epidemic could devastate the besieging army as easily as the besieged city, but they offer no other mercy. The assembly continues to meet. This is remarkable in its way. Democracy persists even as democracy dies. Citizens too weak to walk still crawl to the Nix, the hillside assembly place, to participate in debates that cannot change anything. The question is always the same. Should Athens surrender? The hawks argue for continued resistance. They point to the Persian invasion, when Athens evacuated its population rather than submit to the great king. They point to Marathon, when Athenian hoplites defeated a force 10 times their number through courage and determination. They argue that help might still come, that the Persians might intervene, that other Greek states might rally to Athens' defense, that something somehow might save the city if only it holds out a little longer. The doves respond with arithmetic. How many days of grain remain? 0. How many soldiers can still fight? Hundreds, perhaps, out of an army that once numbered 15,000. How many allied states have sent aid? None. How many will send aid in the future? None. The debate rages for weeks. Speakers collapse at the podium from hunger and exhaustion. Votes are taken and reversed and taken again. Nothing is decided because nothing can be decided. To surrender is to face unknown consequences. The Athenians remember what they did to other cities. Melos enslaved, Cyone destroyed, Mytilene nearly annihilated. They remember the prisoners executed at Aegospotami. They imagine what Sparta might do in return. But to continue fighting is to die. Not in battle. There will be no battle. Simply to die, slowly of hunger and cold, while the Spartans wait outside the walls. In late February, the assembly reaches a decision. The food is gone. The strength is gone. The hope is gone. There is nothing left to debate. Athens will send ambassadors to negotiate surrender. The terms Athens proposes are optimistic, perhaps delusionally so. The city offers to become a Spartan ally, to follow Spartan foreign policy, to reduce its fleet to a token force. But the walls must remain. The democracy must remain. The city must remain free. Lysander listens to the ambassadors. He does not respond directly. Instead, he sends them to Sparta to present their terms to the full assembly of Spartan citizens. The journey takes weeks. The ambassadors are elderly men. Younger leaders cannot be spared from the city, and travel is difficult even with Spartan safe conducts. When they finally reach Sparta, they find a hostile reception. The Spartans reject the Athenian terms, but they do not counter with terms of their own. They simply send the ambassadors home with instructions to return when they are prepared to discuss serious surrender. Athens is being told to starve a little longer, to soften a little more, to become so desperate that it will accept any terms at all. In March of 404 BCE, a politician named Theramenes makes a proposal. He will go to Lysander personally. He will remain with the Spartan fleet for as long as necessary, weeks, months, however long it takes. He will negotiate terms that Athens can survive. The assembly agrees. What choice does it have? Theramenes is an interesting choice of ambassador. He has been on every side of Athenian politics at one point or another. He helped engineer the oligarchic coup of 411 BCE, then helped overthrow the oligarchs when their government failed. He is neither fully democratic nor fully oligarchic. He is a survivor, an opportunist, a man who knows how to read the direction of power and position himself accordingly. Perhaps these are the qualities Athens needs now. Theramenes sails for the Spartan fleet. He meets with Lysander aboard the flagship. The conversation is not recorded, but its outlines can be inferred from what follows. Lysander is not interested in negotiations. He does not need to negotiate. Athens has nothing left to bargain with. The Spartan admiral already holds everything that matters. But Lysander is also not the final authority. Sparta is not a dictatorship. It is a complex system of kings, ephors, and assemblies. The decision about Athens' fate must be made in Sparta itself. Theramenes asks for permission to travel to Sparta. Lysander agrees, but he does not hurry the process. He keeps Theramenes waiting for 3 months, while Athens continues to die. When Theramenes finally reaches Sparta, he finds the city in debate. Representatives of every member of the Peloponnesian League have gathered to decide Athens' fate. This is not merely a Spartan decision, it is a Greek decision, reflecting the will of every state that suffered under Athenian domination. Thebes speaks first. The Theban ambassador is a man named Erianthes, and his hatred for Athens is palpable. He speaks of Athenian crimes, the destruction of Plataea, the ravaging of Boeotia, the decades of Athenian interference in Theban affairs. Let the city be destroyed, he urges. Let the walls be torn down, and the buildings burned. Let the site be dedicated to the gods, forever forbidden to human habitation. Let the population be sold into slavery, scattered across the world so that they can never reunite. He pauses for effect. And let the land of Attica become pasture for sheep. Corinth seconds the proposal. So does Megara. So do the representatives of a dozen smaller states with their own grievances against Athenian power. The vote seems certain. Athens will be annihilated. Then the Spartan delegation speaks. The exact words are not recorded, but the ancient historian Xenophon, who was present or knew men who were, summarizes the Spartan argument. Athens had committed crimes, yes. Athens had been cruel, yes. Athens deserved punishment, yes. But Athens had also saved Greece. At Salamis, when the Persian fleet seemed invincible, it was Athenian triremes that turned the tide. At Plataea, when the Persian army threatened to overwhelm the Greek lines, Athenian hoplites had held the center. In the darkest hour of the Persian invasion, when other cities were collaborating with the enemy or fleeing before his advance, Athens had burned its own homes rather than submit. To destroy such a city would be to destroy a piece of Greece itself. Moreover, and here the argument becomes more practical, a destroyed Athens would leave a power vacuum. Other states would fight to fill that vacuum. The Peloponnesian League would fracture as members competed for the spoils. The peace that Sparta had fought 27 years to achieve would collapse before it began. Better to humble Athens than to destroy it. Better to neutralize Athens than to annihilate it. Better to leave a weakened, chastened, dependent Athens than to leave a hole where Athens used to be. The vote is close, but Sparta prevails. Athens will survive. Theramenes returns to Athens with Lysander's final offer. The long walls must be demolished. Every foot of the fortifications that connected Athens to Piraeus, the walls that had protected Athenian democracy for 50 years, must be torn down. The stones must be scattered. The foundations must be filled with rubble. The corridor that guaranteed Athenian survival must cease to exist. The fortifications of Piraeus must also be destroyed. The harbor that sheltered the greatest fleet in Greek history must become an open roadstead, defenseless against any enemy. The fleet must be reduced to 12 ships, 12 triremes. Barely enough for coastal patrol, certainly not enough for imperial ambition. The remaining vessels must be surrendered to Sparta. All exiles must be recalled. Every politician, every general, every citizen banished during the years of democratic turbulence must be allowed to return. Their property must be restored. Their rights must be honored. Athens must accept Spartan leadership in foreign policy. The city may govern itself internally, but externally it must follow Sparta's direction. Athens will fight when Sparta fights. Athens will make peace when Sparta makes peace. Athens will be an ally, which is to say, a subject. These are the terms. They are not negotiable. Theramenes presents them to the assembly. The debate is brief. What is there to discuss? The alternative is continued siege, continued starvation, eventual total destruction. Athens accepts. It is the 16th day of the month of Menaicheon, approximately mid-April by modern reckoning, in the year 404 BCE. Spartan soldiers enter Athens through the Dipylon gate. They do not come as conquerors burning and looting. They come as demolition crews, carrying picks and crowbars and the heavy iron tools needed to dismantle massive stone fortifications. They march in formation, disciplined and silent, their red cloaks bright against the grey limestone of the city. Behind them come the flute players. This is tradition. Sparta does everything to music. Spartan armies march to battle with flutes playing. Spartan soldiers exercise to rhythm. Spartan victories are celebrated with songs. Now Spartan musicians play the songs of triumph as the long walls begin to fall. The melody is ancient, a paean to Apollo, the god of light and music and plague. The same song was sung after the Persian defeat, when Greek freedom seemed secure forever. Now it accompanies the destruction of the city that led that earlier triumph. The irony is not lost on anyone. Lysander has ordered that Athenians must participate in the demolition. This is deliberate cruelty, psychological destruction to accompany the physical destruction. It is not enough that the walls fall. They must be pulled down by the hands that built them. Work crews are conscripted from the surviving population. Men too weak to fight are still strong enough to swing picks. Men too proud to surrender must now submit to the ultimate humiliation, destroying their own defenses. The work is back-breaking. The long walls were constructed to last forever. They are made of massive limestone blocks, each weighing several tons, fitted together with precision that has defied earthquakes and armies for half a century. Dismantling them is the construction process in reverse, and vastly more difficult. Iron crowbars are wedged between stones. Teams of workers strain against ropes, pulling blocks from their settings. When a section finally collapses, the crash echoes across the plain of Attica, a sound that will be repeated thousands of times over the coming weeks. Some Athenians weep as they work. Tears stream down faces caked with stone dust. Men who never showed emotion in battle sob openly as they destroy the walls their fathers and grandfathers built. Others work in grim silence. Their faces are masks, empty of expression, empty of hope, empty of everything except the mechanical repetition of swing and pull, swing and pull. A few refuse. A man named Autolycus, once an Olympic wrestling champion, now a gray-haired elder, throws down his pick and declares that he would rather die than participate in this dishonor. Spartan soldiers seize him. His fate is not recorded, but he does not return to the work crews. Most obey. What choice do they have? Their families are still hostages to Spartan mercy. Resistance might mean not merely their own deaths, but the deaths of everyone they love. The demolition continues for weeks. Every day the flute players return. Every day the same melodies fill the air. Songs of victory, songs of celebration, songs that seem to mock the misery unfolding below. Some accounts say that Spartan soldiers danced as the walls fell, that they held festivals, drank wine, entertained themselves with the spectacle of Athenian humiliation. Other accounts suggest that many Spartans were uncomfortable with the demolition. They had fought Athens for 27 years, but they respected Athenian courage. The fleet that died at Aegospotami had been manned by brave sailors. The city that endured siege for 6 months had shown remarkable determination. Destroying such an enemy was necessary. Celebrating destruction seemed wrong, but whether the Spartans celebrated or not, the walls came down. Section by section, mile by mile, the fortifications that had protected Athenian democracy were reduced to rubble. The great towers that had guarded the gates were dismantled. The battlements where watchmen had stood for generations were pulled apart stone by stone. By summer, the long walls were gone. Where once an impregnable corridor connected city to sea, now there was only a scar across the landscape, a broad path of broken stone and disturbed earth marking where Athens' protection had stood. The naval surrender is equally systematic. Athenian triremes are gathered at Piraeus, every vessel that survived the winter, every ship that could still float. They are counted, inspected, evaluated. Lysander personally oversees the process. 12 ships are set aside. These Athens may keep. A token fleet for coastal patrol, for chasing pirates, for maintaining the fiction that Athens remains a naval power. The rest are divided between Sparta and its allies. Corinth takes a portion. Thebes takes a portion. Even small states that contributed to the war effort receive a share of the spoils. Some ships are sailed away to new home ports. Others are deemed unseaworthy after years of hard service. These are hauled onto the beach at Piraeus and burned. The smoke rises over the harbor where the greatest fleet in Greek history once anchored. Athenians gather to watch their ships destroyed. Old sailors who spent decades on these decks weep openly. Young men who dreamed of naval careers stare in disbelief at futures that will never exist. The smell of burning wood and terror fills the harbor. It will linger for weeks, a constant reminder of what Athens has lost. The exiles return. They come from across the Greek world, men banished during the war years for opposing democratic policies, for advocating peace with Sparta, for belonging to the wrong political faction at the wrong time. Many harbor deep grievances against the democracy that expelled them. Among the returnees is a man named Critias. He is a philosopher of sorts, a former student of Socrates, a writer of tragedies, an aristocrat who has always believed that democracy is the worst form of government. He has spent his exile in Thessaly, watching Athens from afar, waiting for the moment when the democracy would fall. That moment has come. With Spartan support, Critias and 29 allies seize power. They call themselves a commission to reform the laws. They will become known to history as the 30 tyrants. Their first act is to disarm the population. Athenian citizens are required to surrender their weapons, the spears and shields that had made them hoplites, the swords that had symbolized their status as free men. Those who resist are arrested. Those who comply become defenseless. Their second act is to restrict citizenship. The democracy had extended political rights broadly, too broadly in the oligarch's view. The 30 limited citizenship to 3,000 men, selected for their wealth and their willingness to cooperate with the new regime. Everyone else, the tens of thousands of ordinary citizens who once voted in the assembly, served on juries, shaped Athenian policy, become subject to the 30's absolute power. The killings begin almost immediately. The 30 draw up lists of enemies, democrats, wealthy men whose property is desirable, anyone who might organize resistance. Night by night, these men are arrested, tried before kangaroo courts, and executed. The method is efficient. Hemlock poison, the same method that will later kill Socrates, is administered to some. Others are simply strangled or stabbed. Bodies are dumped outside the walls or thrown into mass graves. The property of the executed is confiscated. The 30 and their supporters grow wealthy on the spoils of political murder. Some victims are genuinely dangerous. Popular leaders who might have organized rebellion, military officers who retained the loyalty of former soldiers. But many are killed simply for their wealth, for personal grudges, for the crime of having prospered under democracy. A man named Leon of Salamis is ordered arrested simply because the 30 want his money. Socrates is among the citizens commanded to help seize him. Socrates refuses. He goes home instead, ignoring the direct order of the government. It is an act of quiet defiance that could have cost him his life. The 30 focused on larger threats, let the disobedience pass. But they do not forget. The 30 rule for 8 months. In that time, they execute approximately 1,500 Athenian citizens, more than died in most single battles of the Peloponnesian War. They exile 5,000 more, stripping them of property and citizenship, driving them into the cold winter of a Greek world that offers few refuges. The terror does not discriminate. Rich and poor, prominent and obscure, anyone who draws the 30's attention becomes a potential victim. Informers are rewarded for denouncing their neighbors. Fear poisons every relationship. Fathers are afraid to speak openly in front of their children, lest the children repeat something to the wrong person. Husbands and wives whisper, unsure whether their partners might seek favor with the regime by betraying family secrets. This is what Athens has become. A city of silence, of suspicion, of terror. The democracy that once governed an empire has been replaced by a junta that murders its own citizens. The freedom that Athenians once celebrated has been replaced by the arbitrary power of 30 men who answer to no one, except Sparta. And all of this, all of the starvation, all of the destruction, all of the terror, flows from a single afternoon on a beach in the Hellespont. Aegospotami did not merely destroy a fleet, it destroyed the conditions that made Athenian civilization possible. Without naval power, Athens could not maintain its empire. Without empire, Athens could not feed its population. Without food, Athens could not resist siege. Without the capacity to resist, Athens could not maintain its democracy. Without democracy, Athens became something else, something smaller, meaner, more afraid. The philosophers will continue teaching, the playwrights will continue writing, the legacy of Athenian culture will survive for millennia. But the Athens that existed before Aegospotami, the Athens that commanded the Aegean, that built the Parthenon, that invented democracy and drama and philosophy, that Athens is gone. It died on a beach in September, in the time it takes 30,000 men to wander away from their ships in search of dinner. If you appreciate stories like this, the kind that go beyond surface-level history to explore the human decisions that shaped our world, consider subscribing to Not Nostalgic History. We tell stories about the past that help us understand the present. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us as we uncover the moments that made history and the lessons they still teach us today. What died at Aegospotami? Not Athens itself. The city would recover, rebuild its walls, restore its democracy, even reassemble a respectable navy. Within decades, Athens would again be a significant power in the Greek world. But something else perished on that beach, something that could never be resurrected. For over half a century, Athens had dominated the Aegean through naval supremacy. The Delian League, originally a defensive alliance against Persia, had transformed into an Athenian protection racket. Subject states paid tribute in exchange for security. Security from pirates, from Persians, from anyone who might threaten their commerce. But primarily, they paid for security from Athens itself. This system required an overwhelming navy. Athens needed enough ships to crush any rebellion, blockade any defector, intercept any trading vessel attempting to escape the tribute network. The fleet was simultaneously tool and justification. We protect you because we have the power to destroy you. Aegospotami ended this calculus permanently. Even when Athens rebuilt its navy in the following decades, the city could never again accumulate enough ships to dominate the Aegean by force alone. The empire was gone, and no amount of reconstruction could restore it. But perhaps the deeper lesson of Aegospotami lies not in what Lysander did, but in what Athens did to itself. The Athenian democracy that fought the Peloponnesian War was an extraordinary political achievement. Citizens, free adult males at least, participated directly in governance. They voted on war and peace. They elected generals and judged their performance. They debated policy in open assembly. This system produced remarkable energy and creativity. It also produced remarkable dysfunction. The execution of the Arginusei generals revealed a democracy that had lost the capacity for measured judgment. Citizens who would face no personal consequences for their votes condemned successful commanders to death for failing to achieve the impossible. The assembly became a mechanism for expressing rage rather than making rational decisions. The rejection of Alcibiades' warning revealed a democracy that could not accept wisdom from tainted sources. The generals at Aegospotami were right that Alcibiades was untrustworthy, self-interested, and politically toxic. They were also right that his military advice was sound. They could not hold both truths simultaneously. The failure to move to Sestos revealed a democracy that punished any action resembling caution. The generals knew that retreating to a defensible position, however sensible, would be portrayed as cowardice by their political enemies. Better to risk catastrophe than to face certain prosecution. These failures were not aberrations. They were features of the system. Flaws inherent in any government where leaders must constantly consider how their decisions will play before an emotional, ill-informed, and easily manipulated public. Athens did not lose at Aegospotami because its sailors were cowards or its ships were inferior. Athens lost because its political system had made rational military decision-making nearly impossible. The immediate aftermath of Spartan victory was not Spartan dominance, but Greek exhaustion. The Peloponnesian War had killed tens of thousands across the Greek world. It had devastated economies, depopulated cities, disrupted trade networks that had functioned for generations. Both victors and vanquished emerged weakened. Sparta's hegemony lasted barely a generation. By 371 BCE, the Theban general Epaminondas would shatter Spartan military supremacy at the Battle of Leuctra, killing so many Spartan citizens that the city would never recover its manpower. Then came Macedon. Philip II and his son Alexander would conquer a Greek world that could no longer unite against external threats. The exhaustion produced by decades of Greek against Greek warfare that began with the Peloponnesian conflict and continued in various forms afterward, left the peninsula vulnerable to a power that had husbanded its strength, while the southern cities bled each other dry. In this sense, Aegospotami was not merely the end of Athenian Empire. It was a crucial step toward the end of the independent Greek city-state itself. Stand on the shore of the Dardanelles today, the modern name for the Hellespont, and you will find no monument to mark where 30,000 Athenian lives ended in a single afternoon. The beach at Aegospotami has never been precisely identified. Scholars debate its location, examining ancient texts and modern topography, but the coastline has changed over 2.5 millennia. Silt has accumulated. Harbors have silted up. The very geography of that forgotten shore has been transformed beyond recognition. This is fitting, perhaps. The men who died there have no graves. Their names, mostly, have been forgotten. They were ordinary sailors, rowers who pulled oars for a drachma a day, marines who carried shields they could barely afford, officers who had risen through competence and luck rather than birth. They were not heroes in the Homeric sense. They did not die in single combat against worthy opponents, their names immortalized in epic poetry. They died in a rout, slaughtered on a beach or drowned in shallow water, killed not by Spartan valor but by their own commander's arrogance and their own democracy's dysfunction. What do we learn from Aegospotami? Perhaps this: that civilizations die not from external assault alone, but from internal decay. Athens was not merely outfought at Aegospotami. It was outthought, outplanned, outmaneuvered by an enemy who understood Athenian weaknesses better than the Athenians themselves. Lysander knew that Athenian sailors would grow careless. He knew that Athenian generals could not accept wise counsel from disgraced sources. He knew that Athenian democracy rewarded aggression and punished caution. He exploited these weaknesses with surgical precision. The Spartans did not build a better fleet. They did not train better rowers. They simply waited for Athens to defeat itself, and then struck at the moment of maximum vulnerability. There is a lesson here for every nation that believes its power will last forever. Strength is not merely military. It is also institutional, the capacity to make good decisions under pressure, to accept uncomfortable truths from imperfect messengers, to balance courage with prudence. Athens had forgotten these things by 405 BCE. The city paid for that forgetfulness with its empire, its walls, and thousands of its citizens' lives. And what of Alcibiades? The man who warned the generals and was ignored did not long survive the fall of Athens. In 404 BCE, agents, possibly Spartan, possibly Persian, possibly sent by the Athenian oligarchy that briefly seized power after the surrender, tracked him to a village in Phrygia. They set fire to his house while he slept. When he emerged from the flames, sword in hand, they killed him with javelins, unwilling to face him in close combat even in his final moments. He was approximately 45 years old. Alcibiades had been many things: brilliant and treacherous, courageous and self-serving, the most gifted military mind of his generation and the architect of its greatest disasters. He had served Athens, Sparta, and Persia, betraying each in turn. But in his last great act, riding down to warn the Athenian generals of their impending doom, he had tried to save his city, and his city had rejected him one final time. This, too, is part of the tragedy of Aegospotami. The man who could have prevented the catastrophe was dismissed precisely because his past made him untrustworthy. The generals who ignored him were not fools. They had legitimate reasons for suspicion. But wisdom does not always come from trustworthy sources, and salvation does not always wear a friendly face. Sometimes the messenger is flawed. The message remains true. The Hellespont flows on. Ships still pass through its narrow waters, tankers and container vessels now rather than triremes, but the geography remains unchanged. Europe still faces Asia across a few miles of churning current. Somewhere beneath those waters, or buried in the silt of that uncertain shore, lie the remains of 160 Athenian warships. The bronze rams that once gleamed in the Mediterranean sun have long since been salvaged or corroded away. The oars have rotted. The hulls have disintegrated. But the questions raised at Aegospotami endure. How do free societies make decisions in crisis? How do leaders balance political survival against strategic necessity? How do democracies hold themselves accountable without devouring their own? How do nations recognize the moment when strength has become weakness, when confidence has become arrogance, when persistence has become suicide? These are not ancient questions, they are eternal ones, and every generation must answer them anew, or suffer the consequences that Athens suffered on that September afternoon, 2,400 years ago, when the sun went down on an empire and rose on a world transformed.